Thank you, Greg.
Gentlemen.
Thank you.
You're
Appreciate
on.
it. What a great intro. What I thought I'd do real quick is just start by putting a link to a one-pager that Pat and I put together for this morning that you would have received tangibly in hand if we were at the Lower Community Park this morning. But here we are on a beautiful rainy day via Zoom. Greg, we really appreciate the opportunity to meet with the community, rain or shine. And for those of you who don't have accessibility to the chat, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the one pager behind the scenes here. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well so we can all see what we're looking at. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, cool. Good morning. Again, Greg Miller, thanks so much for the introduction. My name is Greg Barnes, and I have the privilege of being the Assistant Superintendent of Student Success, a brand new position here in Lafayette School District. And it's a pleasure to join this morning. I'm going to obviously turn it over to Pat for a moment, who can do an introduction all by himself.
All right. Pat Cardullo, Director of Student Services. Been in the DO for quite some time. I think I'm in my 7th year. And happy to talk with you guys today and hopefully answer some questions. And Greg and I have been working together, collaborating ever since he started, which wasn't too long ago, but I feel like we've actually already accomplished quite a bit, and am really thrilled with the direction in terms of where our department's going. So we can talk a little bit about that as well.
So Pat, why don't we take a couple of minutes and just go a little deeper into introductions? Like, why don't you tell the group something maybe that they don't know about you?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I love playing Frisbee. I absolutely love, that is gotta be my go-to sport. Not really a sport, but I kind of enjoy taking my dogs out and playing Frisbee, but I also just like enjoy playing Frisbee on my own with somebody else. So it's something that I have always liked. And I just was in a toy store recently this weekend, and I was eyeing a bunch of Frisbees as if I need to buy more Frisbees, but I actually didn't buy anything. So it was actually good. But I know there's a lot of Frisbee golfing. This is different than Frisbee golfing. I am not a Frisbee golfer at all. So this is just kind of Frisbee, the old school Frisbee, if you will.
Great. Not what I was expecting, but we'll take it. Pat, where'd you go to school?
I went to Davis, and then I went to Sac State for my graduate program.
Yeah.
And then administrative degree, I went to Cal State East Bay.
Awesome. And your background is you're a trained psych, is that right?
Yes, school psychologist by trade, did that for many, many years at Spring Hill and Lafayette Elementary. And then also had the opportunity to teach up in the school psych master's program up at St. Mary's.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you. Again, my name is Greg Barnes. I've been on the job, as Pat mentioned, since July 1st. I thought I'd take a moment, if you don't mind, maybe give you more of an introduction than you ever cared to know. But because this is the first time we have an opportunity to share space together, I thought I'd err on the side of caution. I grew up in Michigan. Those of us in Michigan always do this when we see people. And we always kind of point to where we were born on the mitten, as it were. So I was born over here, Holland, Michigan, Dutch conservative town, closer to Chicago than it is to Detroit. But my childhood was pretty eclectic. My parents were somewhat of adoption crusaders, and this goes back to the early 70s. So if I were to mention Operation Baby Lift to anyone in attendance today, does that strike a chord with anyone? Do you know what that is?
No.
Anybody?
I don't think so.
I know just because you told me, but go ahead.
Yeah, Greg, you can't. That's not fair. Operation Baby Lift was a big push in the final days of the Vietnam War, just prior to Saigon falling, to get as many orphans out of the orphanages as possible. And my sister was one of those babies on the planes that went from Vietnam, landed in Honolulu, where my parents met her for the first time. And they were told at that moment that Mary Kim had cerebral palsy, was born with some operational challenges, in a wheelchair, physically disabled. Back in the day, they labeled her mentally retarded, which is something we would never say now. But they didn't skip a beat. My mom and dad said, we don't care, we want her. And she became part of our family from that moment on. They didn't stop there. They adopted 3 more kids from Vietnam and 1 from the Dominican Republic. So in total, there were 8 of us in the house. We were the house on the block where the little yellow school bus would pull up to every morning, and the ramp would fall out, and we wheel Mary Kim out. She'd go to school and come back, and it was a phenomenal experience for me. So I share that story with you only to share that special education, students with disabilities, has been a privilege of mine from my earliest memories, and has stayed with me and been a focus for my work throughout my career, including in my time as a principal in Palo Alto at a middle school, where I spent 4 years building an inclusive program, opening up 18 sections of co-teaching, and really making sure that all students had an opportunity to succeed in the most rigorous, challenging academic and social environments as possible. Fast forward to my time in Milpitas as a director, we continued our path for inclusive practices across the district, opening up preschool programs, elementary school programs, and some secondary programs as well. And here I am finally finding myself in a district where some of the things that I've been able and privileged to do over my career may find some traction building on historical practices here as well. So with that, I'll pause for any questions for Pat and I before we jump into today's agenda.
I guess it's not a question, but I'm grateful for the personal information you both shared. It's really nice to know, how connected you really are to the special needs community, like from a very young person. So it's really great to hear. Thanks for sharing that with us, for sure.
You're welcome. Well, as Pat mentioned, we have had an opportunity to work together since July 1st. And in spite of that, we're moving in the right direction. One of the things that
that is a prime example of how we work together right there.
That's good.
So Pat, let's just keep this open and free, just kind of like how we do when we meet, and we have an agenda, but we never really stick to it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But we're on what I feel is the road to some really substantive change in the district. And Pat was kind enough to join us today to offer any kind of historical perspective on how the district has worked with students with disabilities and their families over the years. And it's really important for me to forge a strong relationship with Pat, all kidding aside. Because of my experience and my background, I am happy and fortunate to come to this work with some idea of what has worked in the past, but I need to be able to put that aside, put my ego to rest, if you will, and really just take this year to understand what does education for students with disabilities look like in Lafayette. What are we doing as a department? Where do we want to go? How has the partnership between school and community looked over the years? What's working? Where can we make improvements? And really just setting a foundation this year for the next 4 or 5 years. And Pat and I both agree that regardless of who is here in 4 or 5 years, that the work that we're doing is sustainable. It can't live with me, it can't live with Pat, and it can't be tied to any one district initiative or people. Ergo, the more people we get involved in and the more we spread out the roots of this work, the stronger that tree is going to be in 10, 15, 20 years, irrespective of, again, who is employed with the district. So that is really at the heart of the every child, every day mentality, which is essentially our vision, that we believe strongly that every single child should be included, to be given the most rigorous and, again, academic and socially appropriate environments for them to experience everything that public education can and should be. The everyday piece of that is really founded on Pat and mine and Megan Mullen, who is our lead psychologist, and Jen Ripley, who is our lead behaviorist, two phenomenal educators, as well as every member of the department, all of our administrators at the sites, to focus and drive this work every single day. It is at the forefront of where we want to go, and it is a moral obligation that both Pat and I share, which, again, all kidding aside, is one of the reasons why I enjoy working with him so much. So hopefully that underscores this idea that we are working extremely hard. We are leveraging all of the incredible talent and people across the district every single day to create educationally equitable outcomes for all students. Pat, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, I mean, everything you said is just right on point. In terms of moving forward and the vision and what we're trying to do, you know, we feel very good. I do personally feel very good about the programs that have been offered in the district historically, which I kind of inherited many years ago. Looking at them today, we've grown in a lot of different directions. I think bringing Greg on board, it's fantastic that our district was able to do that. I don't think that is something that is very common to have a position like that. And so Lafayette obviously saw that as an extreme area of importance, and to add that piece to our puzzle. And I think it's been great so far. I also think we do have wonderful, amazing staff that are working with our kids on a daily basis. And everything that Greg's talking about in terms of vision or planning moving forward is not just isolated to Greg and me and Megan and Jenny and any of our other immediate core staff here, but it's with the other staff members. We are soliciting feedback and having them be part of this movement more so than ever before. The SPED Advisory Committee is a perfect example of that. These are ideas that Greg and I are discussing with each other, but as far as the details of what we want to concentrate on for the district, it's actually really coming from our staff. And then we're hoping, obviously, with the parent connection, that parents are going to have input with that as well. So the foundation that he's talking about is not something that we're just, you know, coming up with behind closed doors. We're actually using our resources here at work and then tapping into the parent community to really find out, where do we want to be in 5 years? What do we want our programs to look like? What are priorities for us? What's feasible? What's best practice? These are the questions that hopefully we are going to be answering along the way.
Yeah, spot on. I think the analogy that really resonated with me, this is like 3 months in to the job, and we were talking about Pat's position historically and what this new office was set up to do. Pat, do you remember the analogy you gave me about putting your head down?
Yes. Yeah, in terms of how we operate this department, this office, it's fast and furious here with staffing and everything that happens in a school year. These school years go by so quickly to me because there's so many things happening on a daily basis. With Greg's position, which I really do appreciate, it brings our heads up. I mean, when we're working here, we are dealing with whatever's directly in front of our face, and there's always something pressing. The different cases that we're working on, staff things that we're working on, programs, there's so many immediate things that require attention, which I think we do a great job with. But Greg's additional piece is getting us to look further down the road, further steps down the road and around the corner in terms of 5-year projections and beyond. Not that we weren't thinking of those things before, we were, but it's difficult to pull yourself out of the here and now in terms of what's right in front of your face and really kind of get a snapshot as to where you want to be in 5 years. Greg's position is putting structure in place for us to answer those questions while we're also going through the here and now. So for me, that's been a huge change, is meeting and collaborating with someone in terms of planning what the future is going to look like here in Lafayette.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Greg, your title is the Assistant Superintendent of Student Success. Does your role does it go beyond special education, or is it specifically focused on the special ed programs of the district?
It does. Students with disabilities is probably more than 50% of the work, as it has sort of grown since July. But I'm also asked to lead our wellness work, our SEL work across the district, and our diversity and equity work.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the major. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
I apologize. SEL is social and emotional learning. So it pairs with the academic piece of what students are experiencing in the classroom. So sorry, Greg, go ahead. Did you have?
We're good. Thank you.
Okay. No, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. I'll just add one last thing before we get into the heart of the agenda today. Pat and his team are incredible. They're interfacing with staff and lawyers and families every single day. And I have the luxury of relying on him and his team to hold that work, while I can literally look up from my desk, look around and figure out, okay, how do we leverage the talent in the district to go where we want to go? So a big, huge shout out to Pat. He's being a little humble this morning, but we couldn't do this work without the foundation of the historical practices of the department. All right, so what we thought we'd do this morning is talk about 3 main things, one of which we've pretty much done a good job of. That's our philosophy as a department. We really also want to share with you some of the structures that we're putting in place to drive this work. Both Pat and I really feel like our role is facilitator 90% of the time. If we're doing our job well, we don't have to pull people into ideas or thoughts, but we're reserving 10% just in case. We would love to share some of our short and long-term goals with you to get some feedback. And then in particular, what I'm most interested and excited for this morning is understanding how we can continue to partner. I really see today as the first opportunity to share what we're doing, get some initial feedback. And as we go and finish out this year, we're looking to build formal parent structures into our fledgling structures that we're starting this year. So with that as an overview, again, this is linked in the agenda, but here are some more specifics about what we're hoping to speak with you this morning. Again, the Every Child, Every Philosophy. We've done a pretty good job of covering that. I think the only other piece here that I would highlight is that we can't do this work without the experts in the field. And to a person at the district office, we see those experts as the students in the classroom and the teachers who have the privilege of teaching them. So the structures that I'm going to share with you in a moment really underscore getting those cycles of inquiry and those feedback loops in place so we can identify where we are and where we want to go. So let's talk a little bit about the structures that we have in place. Again, we just did a really nice job, Pat did rather, of sort of highlighting what this office holds. And one of the things that we decided to do straight away was make sure that Pat, Megan, Jen, and I, again, director, psychologist, behaviorist, and assistant soup, meet on a regular basis to talk about some of the key pressing issues and to have a dedicated hour every other week for this vision planning. Pat, how has that gone, you think, for the team?
I think it's been great. I think it looks at what we have already in place. We actually cover many different topics in that meeting, from looking at short-term goals, what's going on in current cases with students, cases that require a lot of attention, a lot of managing, a lot of facilitation. For me, that's been extremely helpful to kind of delve into those cases with that group, but then also the planning moving forward in terms of what do we want to highlight. So I enjoy those meetings. I know it's difficult. We are scattered and there's a lot of different things going on here, but it's nice because those standing meetings serve to ground, I think, us in terms of our thinking and what we're trying to accomplish on a daily basis. So I think they've been very productive.
We have one today, as a matter of fact.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. So that would be the first concentric circle of vision planning. The next would be the Student Services Advisory Committee. And this is the committee that we are hoping parents will want to be a part of in the coming months. What we're doing like today is getting informal feedback, and we'll continue to do that for the remainder of this year. And then in working with SEED, maybe get some designated formal parents involved in that committee. What we're doing currently is taking a representative sample of all the different positions or disciplines, if you will, in the district. So it's our ISTs, our paraprofessionals who are in the classroom are a part of this, occupational therapists, physical therapists, behaviorists, psychologists. We have site admin, of course, we have our district team as well. So the idea is that we're reaching out to every job alike group in our department, bringing them together. Right now it's quarterly. We've met twice already. And the main focus for us is identifying short and long-term goals through this huge listening campaign, essentially. We've had a lot of feedback, is my understanding, over the years, whether it is a report that has been done historically or me physically getting out to all of the classrooms this year so far, and or one-on-one conversations that I've had with probably 20 or 30 people in the department since I've started. And we're taking all of that feedback, channeling it and turning it into short and long-term goals, which we'll get into in just a minute. The final piece, which is very unique, I think, to Lafayette, is Pat has historically had meetings with a number of different disciplines, and I'll let him kind of explain what that has looked like historically and maybe what it currently looks like now.
Yeah, when we say discipline meetings, we're talking about our staff, we're talking about the school psychologists, we're talking about the instructional support teachers, OT, speech and language pathologists. And I do meet with them individually or in their groups of disciplines a few times a year for each of the groups. The difference that, and those meetings can be utilized to address anything going on with that particular discipline in terms of best practices. Sometimes there's case conferencing that happens in those meetings. We usually have a pretty thick agenda to kind of get through. The piece that we've added is really trying to get their feedback on the SPED Advisory Committee goals. Right now, we're focusing mainly on the short-term goals. So I've had several meetings with the disciplines, getting their feedback in terms of what they deem to be high priorities for the district moving forward. There's so many different ideas that have been generated from the staff already. When you look at all of the information, it's a little bit overwhelming. Our job is to kind of take all of that information and to keep distilling it over and over again until we come up with some really specific areas for short-term and long-term goals. The good news is, even with all of that information, in terms of how big that collection of data is, we are already beginning to see parallels and themes develop from the different perspectives in terms of what is a priority moving forward. Again, with the focus being student learning outcomes. I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about with everything in terms of the planning. But so far, and I'll just give you one example, one thing that's come up from those discipline meetings, almost from every single perspective, is the priority or need for more collaboration time with each other as a discipline. So the school psychologists collaborating with each other, the speech and language pathologists collaborating with each other. That is coming up as a consistent theme from the different groups in terms of what they feel they would like to have more of. There's plenty of meetings that people go to on a yearly basis. We all know that. This would be a little bit of a different take in terms of really delving into some case conferencing, sharing information, talking about cases that they're working on, all with best practice in mind. This is something that exists mainly when you're going to school, and kind of like when you're in a master's program and you get to kind of do those things. Everybody loves that idea of that continuing in terms of continuing education for our professionals. So it's nice to see that come up, over and over again from the different perspectives as an area that they'd like to see get concentrated on moving forward.
Yeah, it's a great structure to have. Again, it's that sort of third concentric circle where it's leadership, the Student Services Advisory Committee, our discipline meetings, and then in our last circle that we're looking forward to expanding, again, once fall rolls around, is that formal parent piece. And we're actually even looking into the possibility of getting some student voice in there as well. We're not quite sure how to do that, but that is the ultimate goal, is that we have a community of learners who are living and breathing this work every day, help guide that work. So we'll pause there for any questions before we get into some of the feedback that we received from our Student Services Advisory Committee and our discipline meetings.
This is good, guys. Thank you for your outline on the structure. I think it's important for us to understand that and see where our parent community can participate. Love the idea of having students participate as well, as as we can hear their voices as well. So thank you.
All right, well, if there are questions out there, hang on to them. We're coming to the point in the program where we'll have dedicated time to put Pat and I on the spot for sure. Looking forward to that. So what we have now are feedback cycles built into the department, and we've organized them into short and long-term goals. And Pat and I will just take a couple of minutes to share some of the highlights, and then we'll open it up for questions moving forward. So as Pat mentioned earlier, one of the short-term wants, desires amongst the team is more time for collaboration. And that's understandable and needed and important for everyone to push their own best self forward within their disciplines. So many times when you get colleagues together, it is framed in a way where they're sharing best practices to improve ultimately how students are learning in their classrooms. So we're looking forward to providing more collaboration time for our staff. With that comes calibration. There is actually a desire, and this is so phenomenal. One of the things I love about this district is not only are the teachers asking for more time to spend together, but to calibrate districts centrally across, calibrate practices across the district and centrally. So that can take a number of different forms. And one of those examples is a document that we're working on right now. It's the continuum of services document, and Pat and I can take a moment to really explain what that means. The bottom line is we're putting a document together that'll help inform decisions as we move from year to year. That's in the best interest of the student and will help guide transition decision-making for educators.
Yeah, it's really looking at what we offer, what our programs look like at every level, starting in early intervention and then moving all the way up through middle school. The different programs, obviously, the bread and butter of everything is the learning centers that are on each campus, but it goes beyond that, and it really delves into what are the specific places, the specific programs where our services are provided. What do they look like? How are they defined? And Greg's comment on calibration, we're hoping and having the staff be part of this process, because they're actually helping us structure this and define what this is, and define the details that are present in each of these steps and each of these pieces of our programming. We're hoping that that's going to create a consistency in the district in terms of how services are provided to our students at every level, not just in one pocket, EI or elementary, but we're looking and we're focusing a lot on what those transitional pieces look like when students advance through the different stages in terms of SPED programming.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be metric driven, right, Pat?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what we're focusing on, is the details of defining what all of those steps are. And that's the stage that we're at right now, is going through that meticulously. And hopefully what we're hoping at the end of this is to have a really clear definition of every single piece of our SPED programming in the district. That I think will hopefully make things easier for parents in terms of understanding what's offered and the different possibilities for their students, whether it's a parent who's had a student with a disability and has been in the schools for a while versus a parent who's just starting out. I think it would be beneficial to both types of parents. But beyond that, I think it's going to be beneficial to our staff, having our staff have something that they can go to in terms of their decision making for the students that they're working with, in terms of where they are now in their current programming and what's available at the next level.
Some of the other short-term goals that materialize through this process, you can never have enough calibration on writing goals for IEPs. And again, this is coming from the department. So what I read into that is a lot of self-reflection and a lot of support needed from the district to ensure that every student, regardless of the program that they're in, that regardless of the neighborhood they live in, that they are getting the same educational opportunities across the board. It's really, really important for us, obviously. The other piece of that is transition protocols. The continuum of service document, which we just explained, is going to go a long way in helping tighten up those transition decisions. But we've also started a conversation with our staff this year about the importance of data-driven decision-making. And so one of the things we're doing in January to help increase that collaboration and calibration that they want is we're taking a look at our historical transition decision-making model, and we're adding an initial layer to what has historically been that final decision meeting happening in March. It's still happening in March, but we're adding an additional layer in January where we're going to provide all ISTs, for example, to come together, and for the students that they're not really clear, or it's not really clear in their head what they should be doing the following year. I think, Pat, you labeled them like they're kind of on the fringe of that decision. So we're bringing all those cases together. Teachers rather, are bringing their data, and we're going to provide time and space for them to bring up a few of those students with their discipline colleagues to ask for advice. And, what should I be looking at? I've got 2 months to make this decision. Here's what I need help with. What do you think?
Which ties right into the need for collaboration that is being expressed currently by the staff. I think it works in a perfect circle there, where you have the continuum of services, hopefully well-defined. You've got staff that are adhering to that, paying attention to that. The planning moving forward for the students, a lot of the staff know what they're thinking in terms of recommendations based upon how they're working with students. But then there's always question marks in terms of students who are kind of like right on that fence that might benefit from different types of programming. So the collaboration piece, we're hoping, is a time for them to get together and really share some of these cases and delve into it more deeply than they've been able to do in the past.
The last thing that's really rose to the surface, especially in the last 2 years, is the need for mental health related services. Pat, you've had some specific conversation with some of our ISTs with respect to making sure that the students are, if they're in a learning center or classroom, that if some of the opportunities for support are more mental health related, that we start to explore more opportunities for that to be addressed, as opposed to putting them into a learning center, which is primarily an academic support structure. What can you share with SEED about some of those conversations you've had?
Mental health is at a premium right now. It is something that is escalating. It seems like it has been for many, many years. Obviously, the importance, and now schools are really attending more and more and more to it than ever before. Some of this falls within the context of an IEP and can be addressed very well with an IEP. The other pieces are maybe outside of that. And one thing that we've done this year, which I think is a great step in the right direction, is we've added elementary counselors to the mix in terms of hitting a larger percentage of our students that may not be IEP eligible, but still have issues and concerns in this area. I think it's great that we've taken that step. Stanley already has a very strong counseling department that they've been operating with for many years. Elementary's never had this though. So this is the first time for our district. And I would love to see that grow over time, because I think the more that we can address that, pre-IEP, the better it's going to be for the students as a whole. But what we're hearing back from the teachers is exactly what Greg said, which is we do have students who might be presenting with some very significant mental health needs, but academically, they're doing well. They're able to stay within the average band of their classes, if not perform above that. The question becomes, what happens to those students that do have those mental health concerns that require a significant level of support, but that don't necessarily fit within the academic portions of SPED programming? So definitely an area for us to grow. And I think the elementary counselors is the first step in that direction, because to me, it's preventative instead of reactive. It's trying to get ahead of those pieces before we ever get to eligible services that would be under the context of an IEP.
Thanks, Pat. And lastly, just moving into our long-term goals, a lot of the work that we've described here today really does feed into this idea, this need across the district for clear policies and procedures We feel pretty good about where we're headed with that. And then there's only 2 bullet points left, but really there's 3 initiatives. One that's not listed here that I think is just kind of a given, especially given the historical practices in the district, which is inclusion, or I should say inclusive practices, which can look like a philosophy of pushing in rather than pulling out, to making sure that we're pushing as many resources as we can into the general education classroom, as opposed to removing students for SED services. It could look like co-teaching and a number of different things. There's been a lot of buzz around a counseling enriched program. We have a counseling enriched program here at Stanley. And Pat, can you give a quick summary on maybe how far back this conversation goes and what is a counseling enriched program?
Yeah, Stanley's program has been up and running for several years. We started in elementary though. When it comes to a counseling and enriched class, we had several students in the that were requiring a different level of support than what we already kind of had in place at the elementary level. That's why we started that class. I feel the students were served very well in that class. Over time, however, we did not have the numbers to keep that class open, but we did have those types of numbers that were looking very consistent at the middle school level. So we decided to create a program at the middle school as kind of the next step up for counseling enriched. And the idea behind counseling enriched is, at least the way it works at Stanley, is that you have students that are presenting with some significant mental health issues, potentially behavioral issues tied to that mental health. The way the class is kind of worked out at Stanley is we've got students that can actually gain and do very, very well with the general ed curriculum going on at Stanley. So the idea is not to have a self-contained special day class, the likes of which we have at Spring Hill in terms of disabilities, but to have something a little bit more fluid. And the way it's been set up is it's really contingent upon the students' needs in terms of how many periods they get in counseling enriched. We've got a great teacher there. We've got a dedicated school psychologist to the program. We have our behavior specialist that's consulting with that program almost on a daily, if not weekly for sure, but if not a daily basis. And that's what you really need for these programs to be successful. You can create these programs and they can look really good on paper, but in terms of what they do for students, I've seen a lot out there that may not be extremely successful. So you'd have to have the pieces behind it in order to make sure that you're going to have some positive student outcomes. And I feel like the Stanley program's done that. One thing that we're also looking at now is possibly a regionalized program, which would be a collaborative program with other districts in the La Miranda area. We're talking to Orinda, we talked to Moraga, Walnut Creek is in that mix too, in terms of trying to identify if there's some type of a program or classroom that we can all be supporting and all have access to at the same time. Our SELPA has really led us quite well in the last couple of years in terms of developing what this would look like. We are actually making a ton of progress. The pandemic, of course, was a major curveball, and we've had that kind of on the back burner for the last year and a half. But hopefully moving forward, now that we've got kids in school again, and we're hoping that it's going to stay that way, our attention is going back to that concept of regionalized programming. One area that we're talking about that Greg's mentioned that we just talked about is the counseling enriched class at an elementary level. This seems to be a great need for us, but we also view it to be a need for our neighboring districts as well. So it's kind of sounds like the next logical step in terms of shared interests and shared priorities.
Pat, if I can ask a question on that. So is the counseling enriched program, this would be a separate classroom, or would it be sort of cushion services? How does that look?
It looks a little bit differently between elementary and middle, just kind of the way. And it's really kind of been shaped by the types of students that are actually going into the program. So in elementary, it did look, I should say, more like a self-contained classroom where you have students that are learning a huge part of their curriculum through specialized academic instruction happening within that classroom, and then mainstreaming out to general ed classrooms as well. The way it works is Stanley is it's even more fluid. So I don't even, I mean, it can be a self-contained classroom depending on the student's needs and depending on what types of students are in that classroom. But there is a huge emphasis on those students in gen ed settings with the supports that they require, but then having that base in the counseling enriched class in terms of their organization and other pieces that they're learning in that classroom. So just in summary, elementary looks more kind of like a self-contained setting, or it did. But in Stanley, because of the rotation and the scheduling and all the different possibilities those students have, we have our priority, at least with me, and as it's always been in SPED, is to educate our students in those gen ed settings as much as possible, as long as it's meeting their needs. So if we have a student who can benefit from that, benefit by going to a certain classroom with supports, even though they're in the counseling enriched class at Stanley, then we want to do that. It's what our mandate is, and it's best practice as well. It's what's best for the students.
So then let Pat and I close with one final example of a long-term goal. Just last week, we had the pleasure of meeting with Katie Foreman and Elsa Troy, who I'm assuming SEED knows well, specifically around the centralizing and relaunching, if you will, of sustainable practices within disability awareness. So we're gonna take as much information as we can in about what's historically been done. I believe there are some containers floating around SEED somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, Greg. I know we're trying to track those down. And between the four of us, Elsa, Katie, Pat, and I, we're really looking to use a lot of what has been done historically, add some additional resources to it, and move some of these really important lessons district-wide in a more formal way down the road. So we hope that serves as a final fun, important, tangible example of how we're working with SEED and parents moving forward.
Yeah, that's great, Greg. Thank you. And I know Robin drove the recent diversibility awareness program at Spring Hill. Robin, do you want to share what we did there and the good successes that we've had?
Yeah, we are still missing some of our bins with some of our materials, but that's not a big deal. We still have all the paperwork. So the great lesson plans that were created still exist. So Spring Hill was a bit of a challenge post-COVID. So some of the lessons that were a little more involved with sharing materials and stuff, we cut out. But there were still great programs that happened. The second graders unwrapped Starburst with one hand and then got to eat them. But, you know, practice a few fun skills that were hopefully a bit humbling and enlightening. And like you said, Elsa, who's been a really big part of this from the beginning, is really great to have on board. And also as older kids, because I know it can be a little bit more challenging to fold the middle schooling with some of these programs. So I'm excited about the district's commitment moving forward with making this happen on a more regular basis and less sort of fly by the seat of our pants, which sometimes it feels like happens.
Well, let me know if you'd like to be part of that planning, Robin. We'll get you involved for sure.
Great.
Yeah, and we welcome your partnership on that, Greg and Pat. That's been a really great learning experience for students and parents alike over the years. And certainly if we can add a parent component to it as we move forward, that would be excellent. But we've really had some really good success with the program over the last several years. So thank you, Robin, for your leadership on that, and Greg and Pat for jumping in with us as well.
Yeah. Well, listen, that's the end of our show. The last thing on the agenda was really opening it up for any thoughts about what we presented today, and or thoughts on the direction of the district in general.
I have a few questions, but I thought let's open it up to the group here. And then Iria, if you're hearing anything over the internet, do let us know. Any chats that are coming through.
Well, there's nothing right now. Okay. Sounds like there's nothing right now, but we do have a few people watching live on Facebook. So maybe they'll chime in if they have questions.
Great.
And I just wanted to say, were you going to go ahead, Greg?
Go ahead. You go. Go ahead, Celeste.
Okay. I just wanted to chime in as well and just say that I know from being on the ground and doing a lot of the breakfasts through SEED this year and the past couple of years and even before COVID, that we're excited to be able to partner with you guys and just have the increase of communication and the collaboration. I think that's something that kind of the gap that I've seen, especially like being on the board the past 3 years and hearing over and over, is just parents coming in and being frustrated and not being able to understand a lot of the things that are going on. You know, when you have a child that's dealing with these things and it's already overwhelming and then trying to figure out, I know that SEED helped our families so much. I don't think we would be where we are without, you know, the support that they've been able to provide us. Just helping bridge the gap between how to figure things out and, you know, trying to work with the district who's busy and has so many things, you know, on your plate. So I know from talking to parents that we're all just so excited. I know Robin and Greg have been talking with you guys a lot and collaborating. So we're excited about the increased communication. Just some feedback I can give you guys that I've heard from a lot of parents is a lot of things are during the day. And I know your work hours are during the day and it's complicated. So there are some ways that, you know, like recording even this conversation, I know will be so helpful for parents, just so that, you know, there are some ways that we can be, you know, not put into hours that you're already, you know, using yourselves, but, you know, some ways to collaborate so we can kind of include the parents who are working during the well. Thank you guys so much. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I want to give a quick shout out to the document that Special Services Continuum documentation talking about producing. I think that would be invaluable. Not only does it help institutionalize for yourselves, you know, the services that are available and make sure that, you know, all the pieces are covered. But it's, you know, as from personal experience, when you first get, you know, waylaid by your kid's a diagnosis or something, or you're just coming into the district or maybe transitioning between schools, you know, the toughest thing is kind of knowing kind of what's on the menu, and also maybe sometimes realizing that, you know, there are some things that are off the menu. You know, you can get animal style fries or something, you know, things that, you know, so to kind of know what's available and what's out there. And at multiple levels, I would imagine probably a pretty detailed level for internal use, but maybe a more stripped down and de-jargonized version for the newbies that are coming in that are, again, struggling in so many different ways when they first come in, so that they kind of know what's there, because it's, again, from personal experience and from my own personal experience and talking to so many people, it's just, you're like trying to drink out of the fire hydrant at first, and kind of knowing kind of in basic terms kind of what you can do for your kid is invaluable. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, Randy. It's good.
Yeah, here's a little sneak peek. We'll pull the curtain back a little bit. We're not bashful about this at all. We're starting with the general education continuum all the way to a county or an NPS placement. And again, a lot of the details aren't worked out. So, you know, don't look at these percentages and think, oh, that's unheard of. we're looking at 6 different metrics: academic, social, emotional, behavioral, cognitive, adaptive, daily life skill metrics, and communication metrics. And then what are the assessments that can make up those metrics? Are they standardized testing, formalized or informal, rather, formative testing? What do our report card structures look like, and how are we interpreting those standards-based ranges of scores? And again, it goes from general education into pull out services. You can see, obviously, a lot of this information is blank, but the general idea is that we're working with our colleagues across the district to really define what those classrooms are, essentially, so we can make sure we're calibrating academic, all those different metrics, I should say, with actual numbers that'll help form, decisions moving forward.
I'm new to SEED. Somebody suggested I come in and see what you guys do. I'm a local parent and also a local tutor in the Lafayette community. My brother's now in Occolantes. I have a kid at Stanley, and I'm just curious. I also work with a lot of families who are always constantly going, what does this all mean in terms of their kids' IEPs, especially what does this mean, all the jargon, how do we understand it? So like, I agree that transparency around IEPs and how they're written so that parents can really access things is super important. I feel like part of my job as like a tutor or a personal instructor is like always helping parents understand those things and also walking like parents through their rights and what they're like what their kids are protected under the law to have. And sometimes parents don't seem to even understand that or where to start. And I think that's why I kind of came on here. I kind of wanted to see what kind of our district does, because we're so blessed to live in a great district with a lot of resources. But also I'm just curious, I heard a lot of talk about partnership, and I'm curious to know how the gen ed beginning like in early elementary is folded into all of this, and like how we're really helping gen ed teachers to understand and understand kids when they're not fitting the mold. I see a lot of K2 students, and maybe this isn't the right venue for this, but like, how are we really partnering with gen ed to support them to be like, hey, this is a red flag, or these are things that we're noticing, to really start supporting kids earlier so that, the social emotional, we're not in Stanley and we have all these social emotional breakdowns come 4th, 5th in middle school and high school, because we're starting to support kids younger and younger. That is something that comes to me a lot. And it's also, my brother in Occolantes is having the residual fallout of just, being marked like a aloof kid. But there's so many things that we're now piecing together in high school. So I guess it's a really big question and probably one that can't be answered easily, but like, how are we really supporting gen ed classrooms in the social emotional and the academic to really understand kids that might be processing differently, or that might be needing academic intervention earlier before we hit that 3rd grade cusp of like, oh, by 3rd grade, we should be supporting kids and getting the IEPs in order. So what is there like, how are we attacking that in this district to support the outcomes of our most vulnerable and earliest learners?
Great questions, Marjorie.
Yeah, Pat, you want to take a minute and just share like historically what that's looked like, and then I can share my experience.
Yeah, good question. In terms of one thing that I'm thinking about when you're talking about this piece is staff development and professional development. In the past, at least in my experience, we've always tried to kind of join the two in terms of SPED and gen ed kind of working together during those PD days. What I'm seeing more recently over the last couple of years is there's definitely more and more of an influence of SPED topics that are going to be available, that have been available more recently to gen ed teachers. And I agree with you. I feel like the gen ed teachers kind of come in, obviously they have their skill set and they've got their pieces in terms of educating students, but we need to continue that learning that in terms of the pieces of kids that they might see in their classrooms that are requiring support. And I'm not even like just talking strictly just IEP, talking about students in general. so we often are having an increase. We're having an increase more of SPED topics that are available to teachers on the gen ed side. The other piece is we're a small district. The great thing about that is the consultation availability from our SPED teams to our gen ed teachers, I think has always been one of the strongest points of this district in terms of shared information. When they have students that they're struggling with, and I'm not even talking about kids that necessarily are going to be on an IEP track, but just having those professionals, whether it's the school psych or whether it's the OT or the speech and language pathologist, that are available to actually consult and to really, really do some work with the gen ed teachers. For me, that's always started, and the staple of that has always been the student success teams that are on every campus. So that's kind of like stage one in terms of students that are identified that are having issues. Teachers can refer students for that. Parents can refer students for that. And that is just really to kind of get an overview of what the concerns are and then strategizing what can happen. The SPED teams typically, historically, have sat in and been a part of those student success teams. That is also the prelude to testing, if testing's ever going to happen. So I'm not answering your question completely, but I am talking about what I know firsthand that is information and is an ongoing education for our gen ed teachers. But I am just foreseeing that these topics and what we want to expose our gen ed teachers to is only going to increase, especially with what we're talking about with the mental health concerns going on with our kids today.
Right. Well, and sometimes the SPED practices are best practices. Like we don't have to wait until we get a child into an IEP to use some of these best practices in
Absolutely.
scaffolding students early intervention, which might save us in the long run. I just happen to come across a lot of kids who I'm like, wait, why wasn't this red flagged in K1 when you look at them historically? And now we're in third grade trying to make up for several years of loss of whether it's literacy or math or behavioral instruction that could have saved parents heartache, teacher heartache, school heart, you know, when a kid it might have been avoidable to have like a 504 or, you know, other things in place for a student. So I've always wondered as a parent, like, what is that ongoing education for gen ed? Because I think we think of SPED in a silo and gen ed in a silo when the two really inform each other so much.
They do. Absolutely.
And I should preface, I am also a teacher. So like I was a teacher for 10 years in East Oakland. So I'm like, most of those things kind of informed our practice a lot because kids came in needing both. And it's like, how do you suss out and figure out what kids need where? And it was very interesting coming here that things were very bucketed versus being.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to well, I know I can speak from my own personal experiences, trying to wrap my head around why things are so siloed. I think there's this synergy when we can start to break down some of those silos. So as an example, there are 4 things I wrote down as you were asking that question and Pat was talking. First, what are we doing SEL wise? There's an entire social and emotional learning committee, and there's 4 subcommittees that make up that work, 2 of which are specifically dedicated to a social and emotional learning curriculum, which has very specific tools that we're teaching all of our students and that our general education classroom teachers are being given PD on, and they are the ones actually delivering the lessons. The other component, as Pat mentioned earlier, is our elementary school counselors. They're actually working with our counselors here at Stanley, and they are developing risk assessments, protocols for meeting with students, getting on the ground and doing friendship groups. Like they're really just kind of surveying what is happening in the campus culture and in the general education classrooms. So that's promising for us. And then multi-tier system of supports. I'm going to give you guys way more information than you need to know in the next 30 seconds, but think of a triangle. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 as you move up to the tip. anything special education related would lie outside of that triangle. So a fourth stage, if you will. The idea is that anything academically and or social, emotionally, behaviorally, 80% of students' needs can be met in the general education environment. That's that first tier. The next tier, i.e. the next 15 or so-ish percent, those students might need a little extra support than what is normally delivered in the general education classroom. That could look like additional push-in services. It could be lunch groups. It could be any kind of clubs that might be specifically oriented toward increasing the social, emotional learning or behavioral needs of students. And then that last tier is 5% is really kind of pull out individualized support on either the academic and or the SEB side of the pyramid. So one of the things that we're doing this year is we're gathering everything that's being done at the different elementary schools and the middle school, and we're really calibrating, looking at what can we share that's working well at our sites across the district. And we're hoping that that is going to be fruitful for us as we move forward. And then the last piece, I know I'm talking a lot, but I want to just try to give you a general overview because I think it's a really important question. Specifically as it relates to inclusive practices, what I've seen work really well is, well, I'll start by saying this. The most important person at any school site to drive any initiative is the principal, bar none, for obvious reasons. And when you stand behind something like inclusion or inclusive practices, you're sending the message that the philosophy that needs to be adopted across the entire school is that all kids are our kids. Sometimes there's a tendency to say, oh, you have a learning need over here, you go there. You go over there. And I don't have the time or the resources. You're going to have to go get special services over here. We're done with that. We need to build on the historical practices of inclusion in the district, but we also need to start from a foundation of the question shouldn't be, why should I teach this kid? The question should be, why shouldn't I be teaching this kid? And so hopefully with those four things, we're giving you some semblance of where we want to go as a district.
Thanks, Mallory. Christine, you have a question. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Does that work? Okay. Sorry, I called in earlier and then I parked and I think I'm double logged in right now. Thank you so much for all this information. First of all, this has been incredible. I was curious, it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of empathy interviews and building capacity internally within the department and across the school sites. And I was wondering, I know inclusive practices and you were just touching on MTSS are big statewide initiatives. So I was wondering how or if the school district right now is partnering with any of like the Supporting Inclusive Practices Initiative or other CDE funded programs.
Not yet. We want to get this first year and really generate where we want to go internally. And if that ultimately leads to a partnership with a particular organization or adopting of a framework, that's something that we want parent input on. So that type of decision probably wouldn't be made until the beginning of the fall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I wanted to go back to our discussion of continuum of services, and this is in fact a great document that you're drawing up. The one piece I wanted to key in on is parent participation. We've heard a lot of feedback at SEED that transition often come almost like an avalanche. It's like suddenly it's here. Suddenly the child is getting recommended to go somewhere else, or and there's sort of a surprise during these transitions. And Greg, you mentioned data-driven decision-making, and on the sheet you outlined some of those data points that you're tracking. What is the vision for including parents in this discussion and these decisions throughout the year?
Pat, do you mind if I take a 10-second stab and then I'll
Yeah, go for it.
turn it over? I think the gentleman brought this up earlier. We really envision two separate documents, one public facing that is much more of a flow chart, and here is our continuum. The document that I shared is much more of an internal document to, again, provide all of our department members with as much quantitative decision-making as possible. So that shores up their one piece of the IEP team transition idea. My general understanding is that parents are a very important part of that IEP team.
Mhm.
So to have a
I heard that
well-informed,
too. So ahead, go ahead.
to have a well-informed sort of data-backed decision-making model is only one part of that. When the transition discussions happen with parents, I think I would love to know what that looks like. But ideally, everyone is involved in that decision. No one member of the IEP team carries more weight. This is just an idea, or sorry, an effort rather on our part to say, here are all of our ducks. They're in a row. This is the data that's supporting our decision. Now, what does the team think?
Yeah, and I think, IEPs are individualized, right? I mean, so those, it might look different. It might look different at different sites. It could look different, obviously is going to look different for different students. But having a foundation to operate from means that for me, in those meetings, there should be some very robust conversation with everybody involved who knows that student, and the parents know that student better than anybody. The educators are learning, how to educate these students and what it's like in terms of what's best practice for that student. So for me, I think you have the foundation as your anchor, but then the real decision-making, obviously all of the decision-making really should stem from a robust conversation from all of those pieces in an IEP. That's why we, what you guys hear as parents over and over again is no decisions made outside of the IEP. Well, there's a reason for that. The reason for that is that you want to have that core group of people who know the student the best, parents, teachers, service providers, to really kind of come forward with best recommendations for what that IEP is going to look like. I never want to take away that autonomy and the power of those IEP teams to exercise their professional opinions and to move forward with what they think is best for students. Like a cookie cutter equation or a cookie cutter system where you're going to plug in your numbers and it's going to always kind of give you the answer on the other side. The answer for me, oftentimes for students with disabilities, is in the gray. It's not in the black and the white. And I think you tease through that gray with a very, very strong conversation in the IEP. And if it means that you need to have a couple of IEPs to get there, okay, then have a couple of IEPs to get there, because I trust that process. And it's set up in a way to where it should be working in the best interest of student learning. Just a couple of thoughts.
Let me just add one more thing. Sorry, Greg. I needed to say this before you responded. I think there's one big problem with what Pat and I just shared. And that is, it insinuates that there aren't ongoing discussions between home and school with the data that is being collected during the week, during the month. Hey, here's what we're seeing in the classroom. What are you seeing at home? Hopefully those conversations are happening, which can only lead to, better, smoother transition. So when I hear you say sometimes it kind of catches us as a surprise, that's not a red flag for me. I'd say it's a yellow flag at this point. But if there's something that we can do at a centralized level to help push a philosophy where we want to make sure parents are included on this from day one, even if you're just sharing what's going on at school and asking them what they're noticing at home, that's going to be of huge benefit to us and our students.
Yeah, and Pat, I couldn't agree with you more. Everything happens in the IEP meeting, and as parents, we certainly rely on the professionals that are teaching our children. And where we've heard a lot of feedback is that the decisions for transfer or for the continuum plans happen in, say, a year-end IEP meeting, and then it's like dropped on the parents, where the parents think the child is continuing on in a certain path, and suddenly it's this total 180 or at least 90-degree turn, and it catches parents by surprise. And we've heard this several times in our discussions with our community. So I just want to provide that feedback, and also discuss how we can better inform parents, get them more in tune, perhaps, with what's happening in the classroom, or the trend that the professionals are seeing. Love the idea, Greg, of earlier in the year. It's a January discussions of here's what we're seeing. Just want to put this on your radar, and let's talk as a team. Parents, of course, are on the IEP team as well. And to just have a longer runway for the transition, and or at least to get weigh-in from the parents before it's like end of year, got to make a move.
I wanted to just piggyback off that too, Greg. That's definitely been our experience, and I've heard that from a lot of parents too, that there's a lot of collaboration. My daughter is one of the fringe individuals, and there's a lot of collaboration on all the teams, but I haven't personally ever been a part of that. So by the time I get to the IEP, maybe I get the IEP 2 hours ahead of time, maybe I don't. And we're sitting there with everyone who's using their time, and they've spent a lot of time on this decision, and they're very invested in this decision. This has happened over and over. And it's like my husband and I feel pressured, and we don't have the time to really, I have to think about it. And is this aligning with what I'm seeing at home? And if I say anything that's pushback, I feel like I'm going against the professionals and the people who are with her in the classroom every day. But yet my gut in several circumstances has in fact been right. And in fact, when they told the training for them to do the testing, to realize, oh wait, we need to actually, mom was right. And I'm not saying the parent is always right, but somehow, and this isn't just my situation, as Greg was saying, somehow we're getting caught off guard multiple times, and the parents somehow aren't an integral part of the discussions and the collaborations that are happening. So maybe there's some way, pre-IEP, I don't know, because I know everyone's time is very valuable, but maybe there's some way to kind of problem solve. I think.
And even if you could, administratively, I know this is something, probably a burden that, it'd be a challenge to implement, but, even if you were to take whatever you would allocate for IEP and make it 2 of those meetings half as long each one, and say, the first one is the fact finding.
Right.
This is what we see, this is the issue we find. And then maybe at the tail end of that, say, and this is the menu of what possibly could be addressed that. And then have the follow-up meeting, a couple of weeks or whatever, some period of time to digest, because how many, whenever we have an IP, we oftentimes scream and yell to get that document. And often, the success is to get it 24 hours in advance. Or either as I'm coming to a meeting, or and to process that. And again, especially with new parents that are just dealing with this, it's impossible for people to make a cogent decision in that a limited amount of time when so much is going on. There's needs to be to really be participative and collaborative. In the true sense of that, you've got to spread out that process, to give some time for deliberation and discussion.
And I wanted to say, I have a daughter in the early intervention program right now. Everything that Celeste and Greg and Randy are saying, I just had an IEP meeting a couple weeks ago with our team there, and everything they're saying, at least for me, happened for that meeting. I got that IEP at least a week in advance, if not before. I'm getting weekly feedback from her teachers. She had a social thing come up that hadn't been on the original IEP. I knew about that way before I ever had a formal IEP meeting. So, and I know that the early intervention program and the elementary school program, the middle school programs, I know those are different programs, But from my perspective, what EI is doing is exactly what's being talked about. I think they're doing a phenomenal job.
That's great feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm
I
sold
think
with that.
Pat, actually, you mentioned maybe it's several IEPs, and I think that might be a nice model to start moving forward, because I know there's a lot of pressure to just say yes and sign the paper. There's 12 people that have carved out an hour and we're all sitting together. It's a big deal, and I really feel terrible if I'm like, well, let me think about it, and then we all have to come back together. So I like this idea of making it more commonplace, have a informal conversation of sorts before you sign the papers.
Yeah, and I would just real quick add, you know, I think the spirit of this would be like, you know, as a professional, your annual review should not be a big surprise. That you know, if there's trends in your performance, hopefully that's being discussed by your manager and your team, you know, whatever the feedback loop is. And so in the same spirit, and Greg, I'll go back to this, you know, January, it's like, hey, here are some trends that we're seeing. It looks like, you know, we're heading in this direction, but, you know, more data needs to be collected or discussions need to be had. And so it's not blindsiding families in the IEP meeting. Given even a week is great. Okay, it's good, I'll say, but better than 24 hours. But still, it's like, holy cow, we got to, you know, our child now is being recommended to go way over here. That's a surprise to us. So,
Yeah, I think less.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think one of the parents hit it on the head. Coming as a parent and as also being an advocate for some families, there is this like burden that you're feeling like you're burdening the IEP team or like the principal, like the team, right? Like everybody's carving out this hour. And so we often feel that, like, I've had parents tell me like, they're already doing so much for my kid. They're already doing so much. I don't want them to feel like they have to do more. And I think that's how we show up to these meetings, right? I've sat in on a few IEP meetings that have gone both ways in Lafayette. And it's like, actually, you're not a burden. Like, the more that we can figure out and sift through what your child needs, the best we can serve them as a team. And so how do we really come to these meetings like feeling renewed and like present, and like really being a teacher is hard, being a SPED educator is hard, but I think our parents feel like we can present differently sometimes how we show up to these meetings, and like fake it till we make it, because it is hard. And I have been on both sides of those meetings. And then, I mean, it kind of just talks, you think about like even SPED teacher mental health, right? Like in the mental health of our providers and all the things that they're having to do and deal with in order to serve these kids. But I think getting back to this idea of like parents understanding their rights, right? And parents understanding that they can always check in on their kids, that it's not a burden. And how do we communicate that effectively to families so that they know at any time if the IEP doesn't feel right, if they don't have to wait only at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, that it's their, you know. And so how do we like, and I think taking it out of teacher jargon, like how do we do that? Like, so that it's like very understandable to all families, whether you've been in the system for many years or starting out, that these are things that you have access to. I also find that like parents just do not oftentimes understand the jargon of goals, which they just sign hastily because they're like, well, the teacher's making this recommendation, but I don't even know what this goal really means. And so I oftentimes have suggested to families, take the time to bring it back to your service provider, or like really sit in the space. You don't have to sign it. I think that's another thing parents believe, is that we're at this meeting, so I have to sign this paperwork. So that's what I've encountered, but I think how do we make it like feel more welcoming to families, like the whole process?
Yeah. And if you think about, I mean, it's that team, right? It's that team on that site that's interacting with the parents. So that's from what parents know, they know about all of these pieces based upon what that team is telling them. The IEP process, you know, for me, that can be one meeting a year, and it can be very productive and the parents can understand it completely. But in another case, it might be 5 or 6 meetings a year to kind of get there. And there's a lot of variability. We have a lot of parents in this district that know IEPs very well, and they know how to advocate, and they know how to make those requests and jump in and have more meetings if they're not understanding, like you said, the goals or something, any little piece of it that they don't understand. We've got a lot of parents that jump in and advocate very well. But we also have other parents who don't, right? Who are just kind of quiet and then just kind of try to stay the course, and maybe don't feel great about that process or don't understand it completely, but they're going to agree to it anyway. I don't want that to happen. I would rather have as much communication and as many meetings as it takes. And like I said, there's going to be variability there depending on, you know, how the parents are understanding what the program is. But I never want, I mean, and the teams don't want this either, to have parents going home not fully understanding what's happening in that IEP. They should be understanding what's happening. And if they don't, if they need further clarification, they should be asking for more communication time from those teams. And it's going to look a little bit differently in different cases. And I get that. I'm just saying, I would rather have more percentage of our parent population truly understanding the inner workings of that IEP. And
I think that that's on us, right? To ask parents, not that you're advocating for this, Pat, by any stretch, but I just want to clarify, because what I heard was, hey, if you need more, you know, information so that you feel comfortable that we're moving in the right direction, then seek us out. It's got to be the other way around. And it's got to be practice that we are, you know, whether it's more informal conversations or a January initial check-in with here's where we're going, you know, that's partnership 101, right? I just to your point, Pat, I don't want a parent leaving an IEP wondering if they're making the best decision for their kid. Like, I want them having been front loaded enough to where they're walking out of there going, okay, I have a really good understanding with where we're at. I've been able to give my feedback. I understand the goals. I understand the rationale behind it. Let's go. Let's do this.
Right. And it changes quickly too. I mean, you know, the IEPs, we're talking about learners here that developmentally, you know, they're learning at different stages, and there's going to be changes that are happening fast. One meeting having an annual a year, you know, most likely it's not gonna get you to where you need to go. It's what's mandated, right? It's what's in the law, which is great, but it by no means is how we practice or where we want to be in terms of what it takes to kind of really truly have a partnership and truly have a cohesive team. And if parents disagree with what's happening in that IEP, I don't want them to ever feel, you know, obviously like they shouldn't voice that concern because the team works so hard for their student. That's nice, but at the same time, I'd rather they feel like they were really part of that team. It's not to say that there's not going to be differences, because sometimes you're going to have team recommendations, you're going to have what, you know, parent preference. But I still think that means that's more processing and conversation, robust conversation and problem solving to get from point A to point B. It's not an excuse to not have something that doesn't work for all sides.
Yeah, I think the parents in our community certainly have deep respect for the professionals that work at the schools, work with us, and I think the spirit of this discussion is how do we bring the parents more in the loop earlier in those discussions, and for sure, I mean, we know exactly what's happening at home and can weigh in on things that are being considered, and certainly it would be very beneficial to get informed on, hey, here's the direction which we're heading, or that we're recommending, just to stay ahead of it. So I know we are. So, go ahead, Greg.
Just to give you a sense for a next step here, I know are we really after 11 already? Wow, that's amazing. So Pat and I will take this to our meeting today, and we'll ask the question, how do we change our practice? What conversations can we have with the Student Services Advisory Committee? Because we can't just come at them any work that I've ever done. If you just say, we're going to do this, you have to do this, like, forget it. Like, you just set yourself back a year. So the way you do that is through questions and prompts and brainstorming. So Here's what I would like SEED to do is by the end of the year, like this school year, I want to know if you've noticed a difference in communication between home and school. Let's just leave it like that. Let's just leave it a little broad. Having said that, you will see some changes in January with some initial reaching out, because we're not going to wait another year till another calendar January to have a initial check-in. So all that said, understand that the conversation just doesn't die here. Okay, we're moving it forward. Now, what I would love is to be held accountable in 6 months to see if culturally you're noticing a shift.
Challenge accepted.
Thank you so much.
No, that's great. That's certainly music to our ears, and for a lot of parents in our community. So thank you, Greg, for that. And love it that, it's December. We have January coming up, and perhaps this is a shift that we can make, in real time in the next few weeks, and have sort of a January check-in type of format introduced. But I'll leave that up to you guys and how you want to do it, and we'll certainly provide feedback at the end of the year.
I think the general idea was for us to connect with SEED quarterly.
Yes, so absolutely. Now, this is, as I say, just the first installment of On the Ground. Thank you, Greg, for that slick title. And so we're going to do more of these throughout the year. And what we're loving about our relationship with the district, SEED and the district, is in fact the collaboration. It's really, I think, enhanced over the past few months, and certainly over the past year or two. And so let's keep this going. And please send any emails to our SEED address. It's on our website. We have regular discussions with Greg and Pat. Greg, Pat, I assume there's a way that parents can also get in touch with you, perhaps by your website. But ideas welcome. We are all in this together, and we certainly appreciate the collaboration that exists between the district and SEED and us, personally here. So thank you all for joining. Greg, Pat, any final words?
Well, I have one last thing. Pat, did you want to say anything before I?
No, just I think this is a great step. I feel the parent dialogue between this and the parent dialogue meetings, and some of the other pieces that we have going, I'm encouraged. I'd love to kind of work through and tease some of these issues out and do some problem solving in real time with the parents. And if it can make for smoother transitions and smoother IEPs, and parents understanding more from those IEPs, and then the teams feeling better about that, then, I think we all would like those same outcomes. So it's encouraging.
Yeah, well said. All right, my last comment, if you guys can all focus on Pat's Brady Bunch square for a moment, and in particular, look over his left shoulder. The question I have for the group is, giraffes or hyenas?
Wow.
I'm going giraffes.
Okay, I'm doing a tally mark here.
Oh, boy.
All right, guys, thanks so much.
Giraffes, they're giraffes,
Pat, what's the
they're
history on
giraffes,
this?
by the way.
The
These are
giraffe.
actually, this is painted by, 4 staff members did this year, a couple of years ago. Different staff members went to one of those painting, I don't even know what they're called, painting places where you can kind of do your own art. And then the question posed to me was, I had to pick out who did which giraffe. So in terms of how well I know my staff, I think I was 0 for 4 with my guesses. So I guess I'm not adept at judging the artistic skills of my staff as of yet, but I'm willing to learn.
All the SEED boards will do our own giraffes for the next meeting. And you're gonna make those.
Perfect.
Good. All right.
Thank you.
Well, good.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody. Any last
Happy
comments
holidays.
from the SEED group? We're good.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks so
Bye.
much, everybody. See you.
Bye.
Bye.